Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When ex-Marine Justin Cole moved into his grandfather's old farmhouse, he expected peace, not war. But when a tyrannical HOA next door tried to claim his land with forged maps, fake evictions, and brute force, they picked the wrong man. This wasn't just a property dispute, it was a battle. When I first turned off the main road and pulled up to the old farmhouse, I felt like I was finally home. The place wasn't much by city standards, just a rugged old property nestled on the edge of a sprawling HOA development called Sunridge Valley, but it had been my grandfather's, and now it was mine. 8 months of sweat equity, welding new gates, replacing the sagging porch, upgrading the wiring, pouring concrete for my workshop out back, and turning a dusty wreck into something livable. This wasn't just a house, it was a statement. I didn't mind the HOA next door. I'd done my homework. This house wasn't part of it. Legally, officially, unequivocally, not part of Sunridge Valley. Different parcel number, different zoning, different everything. I had the deed, the original survey, and even a notarized document from the title company confirming I was not subject to HOA jurisdiction. But clearly, someone over there didn't get the memo. The first letter came the day after we moved in. A white envelope taped to the mailbox. "Welcome to the community," it said in elegant cursive, followed immediately by a list of demands. Remove the Marine Corps flag from the porch, paint the exterior in compliance with approved palette guidelines, submit architectural plans for my workshop for HOA review, and, this one made me laugh out loud, submit a check for the initiation fee of $800. I took a photo of the letter, printed out copies of my deed and the zoning map, and sent it back in a sealed envelope with a sticky note that read, "Wrong address, try again." That didn't go over well. 2 days later, a woman showed up while I was installing floodlights over the driveway. Mid-60s, tight khaki slacks, pearl earrings, clipboard held like a weapon. I knew who she was before she even spoke. "Mr. Cole, I'm Karen Lindstrom. I'm the elected president of the Sunridge Valley Homeowners Association." "Of course you are." I didn't say anything. Just let her keep going. "I noticed your property sits directly adjacent to the community. We consider it part of our visual domain. For uniformity, we ask that you—" I cut her off with a grunt and walked back to my toolbox. "Lady, I'm not part of your HOA. Not now. Not ever." She huffed like I'd slapped her and tried again. Something about neighborhood harmony, long-term property values, maintaining standards. I flipped the breaker on and tested the lights. Bright enough to land a chopper. She flinched. The next day, I mounted a 12-foot pole in the center of the front yard, flew the Marine flag at full mast, and installed motion-triggered floodlights pointed directly at the street. Beneath it, I bolted a metal sign into the dirt. Black letters on a silver background. "Not a member of HOA. Do not approach." That night, my cameras caught 3 figures standing on the edge of the sidewalk. One was Karen. She had binoculars. I watched from inside with a cold beer in hand. The audacity of that woman was almost impressive. Almost. By the following morning, I knew I was dealing with something more than just an overzealous retiree. These people weren't going to back off just because I told them to. They had that creepy suburban cult energy, smiles up front, daggers behind their backs. Fine. I've dealt with worse in desert war zones and bar fights. If they wanted to fight over land they didn't own, they'd pick the wrong guy. It was just past 9 in the morning when the cops rolled up. I was halfway through unloading a shipment of hydraulic parts for a Caterpillar dozer I was rebuilding in the workshop. My wife Dana called out from the porch, voice tight. "Justin!" Cops at the gate. I wiped my hands on a rag, stepped out into the sun, and saw 2 sheriff's deputies parked on the other side of the front fence. One of them was already unhooking the latch to the gate. I moved faster. "Can I help you, officers?" I asked, planting myself between them and my driveway. The older one, gray buzz-cut mirrored shades, nodded. "Morning, sir. We received a report of possible unlawful occupation of this residence. Is this your home?" I just stared at him for a second, then laughed. I couldn't help it. "Unlawful occupation? You think I broke into my own damn house?" The younger deputy looked mildly uncomfortable. "A member of the Sunridge Valley HOA reported suspicious activity, said this property might have been abandoned and taken over without authorization." "Right," I said, because I hauled in a moving truck, renovated the place for 8 months, and set up utilities with fake IDs. I walked into the garage, grabbed the plastic binder I kept for this exact reason, and handed over the deed, tax records, utility bills, and the title. Everything in my name, all dated and official. Both deputies took a few minutes flipping through. The older one eventually looked up and scratched the back of his neck. "Looks clean," he muttered. "Real clean. Sorry, sir. Standard protocol. We're just following up on the complaint." "Mind telling me who filed it?" The younger one glanced at his clipboard. "Karen Lindstrom, president of Sunridge Valley HOA." "Of course she did," I muttered. They got back in the cruiser and rolled out, a little more polite than when they came in. I went back to work, or tried to. An hour later, I walked up the driveway to get the mail, and I froze. There, zip-tied to the front gate, was a laminated sheet of paper inside a clear plastic sleeve. Bold letters at the top, "Notice of eviction, Sunridge Valley, HOA, no court stamp. No docket number, no judge's signature, just HOA letterhead." Some laughable legal-sounding phrasing about unauthorized occupancy and failure to comply with community standards, and a deadline, 72 hours to vacate. I yanked it off the gate, read it twice, and then looked up at the street. No one was there, but I knew damn well who had put it up. I walked back inside, scanned the whole thing into my system, then printed out 3 more copies and handed one to Dana. "Just in case," I said. That evening, I installed a second camera angled at the gate and added a small loudspeaker to the porch. If they were going to play games, I was going to record every second of it and maybe shout a few things back. The next morning, I called the sheriff's office and explained the situation. The sergeant on duty sighed audibly when I mentioned the HOA. "Let me guess, Sunridge Valley. Bingo. I've had 6 calls from that place in the last 2 months. They think they're a damn government agency." "I need this on the record," I told him. "They posted a fake eviction notice on my private gate. I want a file started." He agreed and logged the incident. I also sent a formal letter to the HOA via certified mail with copies of my property documents and a cease and desist warning. I didn't expect it to stop them, but I wanted a paper trail. Then I did something a little extra. On a whim, I printed a new sign bigger than the last. "Private property. Not part of HOA. Trespassers will be prosecuted." I laminated it, mounted it to an aluminum post, and planted it next to the driveway like I was staking a damn claim during the gold rush. They'd started a game I didn't want to play, but I knew how to win it. I didn't have to wait long for the next move. Less than 24 hours after I posted the new sign, I caught them on camera again. It was a little past 6 in the evening. The sun was low, shadows long. I was tightening bolts on the engine hoist when the motion alert pinged on my phone. I pulled up the feed, and there they were, 2 men in polos and khakis standing at my front gate, unrolling another plastic notice. One of them had zip ties. The other, a goddamn crowbar tucked under his arm. I dropped the wrench and walked out the front door, calm and steady. "Hey," I barked. "You want to explain what the hell you're doing on my gate?" The one with the crowbar turned and smiled like he was handing out flyers for a bake sale. "We're just delivering formal HOA documentation, sir. Standard enforcement procedure." I took 3 steps forward until we were on either side of the fence. "You are not law enforcement. You have no jurisdiction here. That's a private gate on private land. You touch it again, I will have you both arrested." The second guy, tall, pale, the kind of smug that comes from watching too much cable news, folded his arms. "You're making this more difficult than it has to be. We have the right to enforce." That's when I saw him glance at the crowbar, shift his weight. He was about to try something. I opened the gate. I didn't lunge. I didn't shout. I just stepped out with purpose. "Back off," I said, low and firm. He raised the crowbar like he wanted to posture, but it was all wrong. He wasn't used to men who don't flinch. I moved fast, closed the space, slammed my shoulder into his chest, and knocked him clean off balance. He hit the gravel hard with a curse. The other guy grabbed his friend's arm like he thought about pulling him up until I turned to face him. "You want to be next?" He stepped back with his hands up, muttering something about calling their attorney. "Please do," I said. "And when you do, let him know the police are on their way." Because I'd already hit the panic button on my phone, I heard Dana's voice inside the house, already on the line with dispatch. She was calm, like she'd done this before. "I suppose being married to a former Marine teaches you a few things about timing." Within 5 minutes, 2 cruisers pulled into the street. I backed up and raised my hands just to make everything crystal clear. One of the officers recognized me from earlier. I could see the recognition in his face and the irritation. I gave a short statement, showed them the footage from my camera, and pointed to the crowbar lying on the gravel. The guy I'd knocked down was still sitting up, breathing heavy and rubbing his ribs. He tried to spin the story, claimed I attacked him unprovoked. Then my neighbor Gary walked up from across the street. "I got the whole thing on video," he said, holding up his phone. They were threatening him and trespassing. He told them to leave. That guy swung the crowbar first. The deputies didn't even blink. They arrested both men on the spot, trespassing, attempted assault, disturbing the peace. As they cuffed them, one of the men shouted, "Karen's gonna sue you. She's the president of this community." One of the deputies chuckled. "She's not the president of his land, genius." They drove off, siren silent, dust in their wake. I gave Gary a firm handshake and thanked him. He just grinned and said, "Hell of a show. Beats anything on TV." Later that night, I emailed the footage to my lawyer and filed a formal assault report. We were building a rock-solid record. I wasn't just going to stop them. I was going to bury them in their own paperwork. A week of silence. That's how long it lasted. No letters, no uninvited guests, no phantom notices zip-tied to my gate. For a moment, Dana thought maybe they'd finally gotten the message. I knew better. People like Karen don't stop. They reload. Sure enough, on a Thursday morning, I got a knock at the door. A courier in a blue polo handed me a thick manila envelope marked certified, legal notice enclosed, return address, Sunridge Valley HOA Legal Affairs. I opened it right there on the porch. Inside was a stack of printed documents, a letter claiming my property had been officially incorporated into the HOA jurisdiction via a boundary correction and plat adjustment, along with an attached map showing the new HOA perimeter, which, of course, now swallowed my entire lot like a snake eating a fence post. I stood still for a long minute, rereading the text. The language was formal, but it boiled down to this. Congratulations, you now owe us monthly dues and must comply with community standards, effective immediately. They were trying to annex me. Retroactively, I drove straight to my lawyer's office. Franklin Worth was already waiting when I got there. Big man, southern drawl, a sharp mind buried under cowboy boots and a bolo tie. I handed him the envelope and watched his face twist as he read. "This ain't just wrong," he said slowly. "It's criminal." He pulled up the official county plat database on his monitor and searched my property number. Sure enough, the map there now matched the one from the envelope. My lot had magically shifted jurisdiction on the county's own system. Franklin leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle. Well, now we've got something spicy. Someone inside the Department of Land Registration either made a huge mistake or they're on the take. He printed off the current public record, then dug through his archives and found a hard copy of my original deed and plat from the title company. Dated 10 years earlier. They didn't match. Not even close. The new map omitted the legal description that clearly excluded me from Sunridge Valley. It was a clean digital forgery, one that somehow made it into official public records. "This didn't happen by accident," I said. "Nope. Someone altered the system and uploaded it like it was legitimate." Franklin's eyes lit up with something that looked a lot like bloodlust. "We're going to court. And while we're at it, we're calling in the DA." That night, we filed an injunction against the HOA to halt any enforcement actions, along with a formal complaint to the county clerk's office. Within 2 days, the district attorney's office confirmed they were launching an internal investigation into irregular boundary adjustments involving a staffer named Brian Edley, Registrar, Department of Land Registration. Franklin told me to hold back from releasing anything public just yet. I held back until the next morning. Then I uploaded 2 things to the local town forum and every neighborhood Facebook group I could find. First, the gate cam footage of the 2 HOA thugs trying to nail up an eviction notice and starting a fight. Second, side-by-side screenshots of the real map and the fake one with a big red caption, "They forged county records to steal my land. Don't think you're safe." The reaction was immediate and volcanic. Dozens of neighbors chimed in. Some had received weird letters from the HOA too. Sudden fines, boundary disputes, threats over yard decor. Others said they'd suspected something fishy for years but couldn't prove it. Karen had overplayed her hand, and now everyone was watching. 2 days after I posted the maps, the local news came knocking. A reporter from the Channel 8 affiliate showed up in front of my gate with a cameraman and a laminated press badge flapping in the wind. I was in the middle of checking the valve timing on a diesel engine when Dana called me out. "You planning on going viral?" she said, smirking. I wiped my hands and stepped outside. The reporter's name was Tina, young, polite, but she had that look in her eyes, the kind you only see in people who smell scandal. "Mr. Cole," she started. "Do you have a few minutes to speak on the record? We've received reports of an attempted land annexation by an HOA. It appears the Department of Land Registration is under investigation and your name is at the center." I nodded once. "You came to the right place. We filmed for 10 minutes. I stuck to the facts, the fake eviction, the forged map, the attack at my gate, and the ongoing DA investigation into the land registrar. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. The truth had enough bite." The story aired that evening. And Karen. She finally cracked. The next morning, HOA members went door to door in Sunridge Valley, handing out a flyer titled, "A Community Under Siege, The Threat of Anti-HOA Extremism." There was a photo of me, blurry, cropped from security cam footage, beneath some inflammatory nonsense about dangerous individuals refusing to comply with neighborhood norms. They made it sound like I was building a militia compound and sacrificing goats in the garage. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. But then my lawyer called. "Justin," Franklin said, "you've got another problem." Karen had filed a formal complaint with the county sheriff's office accusing me of creating a hostile threat to the neighborhood through intimidation and paramilitary display. Apparently, flying a Marine flag and owning a reinforced gate was now considered terrorism, but Franklin had already seen it coming. "We're filing a preemptive motion to suppress any attempt to use this complaint in court. It's nonsense, but we need to stay 2 moves ahead." Meanwhile, the forum thread I'd started exploded. People from other counties chimed in with similar HOA horror stories. A retired judge even commented, saying what Karen had done with the forged boundaries could easily rise to second-degree felony charges. That's when I got the call. A contact of mine, a guy I served with who now worked in the state attorney's office, gave me a heads up. "We're preparing a criminal indictment, not just for Karen. There's more." Turns out Brian Edley, the registrar who adjusted the map, had already confessed under pressure, claimed he did it as a favor to an old friend, Karen Lindstrom. In exchange, she'd allegedly helped secure his son a suspicious zoning variance for commercial land next to the HOA. It was classic small-town corruption, rotten and arrogant. Franklin and I submitted a new motion in civil court, adding Edley as a co-defendant. The hearing date was expedited, 2 weeks out. And now the DA was circling both of them like sharks around a bleeding raft. Karen must have felt the heat, because 2 days later, a second letter arrived, this time from a law firm in Dallas claiming to represent the HOA and demanding an immediate cease to defamation and the return of property to community authority. Donna read it over my shoulder and laughed. "They still think they own you." I took the letter, scanned it, and posted it next to the others on the wall of stupid I'd hung in the workshop. Then I wrote back. 1 line. "Come take it. I dare you." The courthouse in Comal County didn't see much excitement. Most days, the docket was clogged with traffic violations and the occasional small claims beef over a fence line. But the morning of our hearing, the parking lot was full by 8:30. Franklin and I walked in wearing suits that didn't match but made a statement. We came to work, not to pose. Karen was already seated at the plaintiff's table, flanked by 2 attorneys in navy blue power suits and smirks that looked factory-issued. She wore a beige pantsuit and a scowl like someone had just spit in her morning latte. She didn't even look at me. The judge, middle-aged, no-nonsense, former military by the way he held his spine, called us to order. This is a preliminary hearing to determine the merits of Mr. Cole's complaint against the Sunridge Valley HOA and co-defendant Brian Edley, registrar of the county land department. Franklin stood and went to work. He didn't shout, didn't grandstand, just walked the court through the evidence like he was assembling an engine. The original deed, with plat and legal boundaries. The forged county map showing the altered border. A sworn statement from a surveyor confirming no actual changes occurred on the ground. Security camera footage. Public records showing the digital signature used to upload the altered map came from Brian Edley's department credentials. Then he dropped the hammer. We also submit a transcript from the DA's interview with Mr. Edley, wherein he admits altering the map at the request of Ms. Karen Lindstrom, president of the HOA, with the knowledge that Mr. Cole's property was not and has never been part of Sunridge Valley. Karen's attorney shot to his feet, objected, claimed hearsay. The judge shut him down flat. It's not hearsay if it's a recorded admission under investigation. That was the moment Karen's mask cracked. She slammed her hands on the table and stood up. "This man," she pointed at me, "has terrorized this community, mocked our standards, turned people against us. He planted that flag just to provoke." The judge gave her a long, frozen stare. "Sit down." Now, she hesitated, lips twitching, but obeyed. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The judge concluded the hearing by granting an emergency injunction. The HOA was forbidden from contacting me, placing any materials on my property, or enforcing any actions pending full resolution of the civil trial. He also referred the entire matter to the State Attorney General's office for review of criminal liability, specifically conspiracy to commit real estate fraud and abuse of public office. Outside the courtroom, local press swarmed us. Microphones, flashing cameras, half-formed questions thrown like popcorn. Karen tried to push past but slipped on a step and nearly took down one of her lawyers. The clip would hit YouTube that night and rack up 200,000 views by morning. I gave one short statement to the press. "I'm not anti-HOA, I'm anti-bullying. You don't get to rewrite the law because someone painted their house a color you don't like." Franklin and I got back in the truck and pulled out of the lot just as the first headlines hit the local news. HOA president accused of forging county records, criminal investigation underway. We were halfway home when my phone buzzed with a text from a neighbor I barely knew. "Just watch the live stream. Hell yes, man. You're doing God's work." I looked at Dana in the passenger seat. She smiled. "Think they finally get the message?" I asked. She shrugged. "They will when the cuffs come out." By the end of that week, everything started to unravel, just not for me. First came the press conference. The Comal County District Attorney, a thin woman with a sharp jawline and a voice like cold steel, stood at a podium flanked by two deputies. Cameras flashed as she read from a prepared statement. "We are filing formal charges against Brian Edley, Registrar of Land Records, for falsifying public documents, abuse of position, and conspiracy to commit property fraud. He has been taken into custody and will be arraigned on Monday." I watched it live, arms crossed, standing in the middle of my workshop. Behind me, the TV flickered with his mugshot, a pale man with sweat-matted hair and eyes wide like a deer caught mid-lie. The next day, I drove past the HOA's management office, just for the hell of it. I didn't even get out of the truck, just circled the block. But what I saw told me everything I needed to know. Two people were standing outside the glass door, waving folders and yelling at a woman behind the reception counter. One of them had a rolled-up lawn violation notice in his hand and was jabbing it at the window like a dagger. The other looked like he'd just come from church, but his face was red and mean. A third guy stood off to the side, filming the whole thing. HOA board meetings, I later heard, had turned into blood sport. Neighbors were demanding answers, why money had gone missing, why their own property lines were suddenly under review, and why the board president was being investigated by the state. By Saturday, 3 board members had resigned. One of them left a Facebook post before disappearing from the group entirely. I joined the board to help my neighbors, not to get sued alongside a tyrant. Karen, though, she doubled down. She called a special emergency HOA meeting at the community rec center. According to folks who went, it was a disaster. Half the neighborhood showed up. She stood at the podium and started with her usual sermon about order and standards and preserving property values. Then someone stood up and asked if she'd forged the boundary documents. She said it was an administrative oversight. Another person asked why Edley had been arrested. She blamed fake news and political witch hunts. The room turned. Voices rose. Someone shouted, "Resign." Another yelled, "You're done." The meeting ended with Karen storming off stage, red-faced, as half the room booed and the other half filmed her. That night, someone egged her house. I didn't condone it, but I didn't lose sleep either. Meanwhile, Franklin filed an amended complaint in civil court, adding emotional distress, harassment, and attempted unlawful seizure of property. He also filed a request for full financial disclosure from the HOA's internal books. He suspected kickbacks and embezzlement. Then came the real kicker. The state's Office of the Inspector General launched a parallel investigation into the HOA itself. Allegations of misuse of funds, inflated vendor contracts, payments made to companies linked to Karen's relatives. The whole thing was falling apart faster than a junkyard transmission. And through it all, I stayed quiet. Didn't gloat. Didn't post. Just kept stacking receipts and letting the machine chew through its own wires. The court date was locked. Criminal and civil hearings would be held within weeks of each other. Karen was drowning in paperwork, and I was still in my house, under my flag, drinking my coffee in peace. But I knew it wasn't over. Cornered animals fight the hardest. They say a drowning person will grab a knife if it floats. That's exactly what Karen did next. 10 days before the civil hearing, I was served. A thick envelope from a law office in Austin landed in my mailbox. Inside was a countersuit. Karen, acting in her personal capacity, was suing me for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and reputational sabotage. It read like a badly written soap opera script. She claimed I'd willfully orchestrated a public smear campaign, had provoked unrest among Sunridge Valley homeowners, and, my personal favorite, deliberately weaponized military aesthetics to create fear and intimidation. Franklin snorted when he, "Rate it. She's suing you for being intimidating." "I guess I should apologize for being tall," I said. "She's got nothing, but she's throwing it all at the wall, hoping something sticks. Let's bury her." By the time we walked into court, the tension in the air was thick enough to chew. The courtroom was packed. Neighbors, reporters, even a few law students from the local college. Everyone wanted to see how the story ended. Karen sat across the aisle from me. No lawyers this time. She was representing herself. Either she was out of money, or her last attorneys finally realized she was radioactive. The judge looked tired before we even started. Then Franklin dropped the entire case on the table like a cinder block. He presented timestamps, footage, notarized statements, public records, expert testimony from a licensed land surveyor, and finally, hard copies of emails from Brian Edley that we'd obtained through discovery. One of them read, "Just got the file from KL. Looks like her neighbor still thinks he's independent. Let me clean this up and push it through before it hits review." Another one, "Got the new lines in place. If the clerk asks, just say it's a rollback correction." The courtroom went quiet. The judge looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Then he turned to Karen. "Do you wish to continue your countersuit, Ms. Lindstrom?" She stood. Her hands trembled slightly. I was only trying to protect the neighborhood," she said. "Mr. Cole encouraged violence. He embarrassed me. I'm being harassed." Franklin leaned in. "Do you have any evidence to support that, ma'am?" Silence. The judge exhaled. "Countersuit dismissed with prejudice." Then he added, "And this court finds probable cause for referral to the district attorney regarding Ms. Lindstrom's actions. We're forwarding the case file to the AG's office." It was over. Almost. Outside, reporters tried to get a word from Karen, but she pushed through the crowd, climbed into an old Lexus, and peeled out so fast she nearly clipped a fire hydrant. Franklin and I walked to the truck in silence. When we climbed in, he looked at me and said, "I'd say we just won, but something tells me we're not done yet." He was right. 2 hours later, we got word. The state AG had officially opened a criminal case against Karen Lindstrom for conspiracy, document fraud, abuse of position, and obstruction of justice. The hammer was finally falling. The criminal trial took place 2 months later in San Antonio. Bigger venue, bigger stakes. The state wasn't playing around anymore. Karen was now facing multiple charges: conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, falsification of public documents, abuse of civil authority, obstruction of justice, and knowingly inciting a false police report. She showed up to court flanked by a public defender and a thin, defeated-looking man I assumed was her ex-husband. Her hair was pulled back so tight it looked painful. The pride was gone, replaced by panic, like a deer that finally realized the headlights were real. I sat behind the prosecution, not as a participant, but as a witness. When I was called to the stand, I told the story one more time: how I inherited the house, how Karen tried to fold me into the HOA by brute force, how she sent people to harass me, tried to rewrite property lines, and ultimately got a man arrested because she didn't like the view from her porch. The prosecutor didn't need to embellish. The facts spoke loud enough. But just to hammer it home, she played the courtroom the email from Edley where he said, "KL wants this neighbor gone. Says he's an eyesore." The jury didn't take long. 5 hours of deliberation. That's all. Karen was found guilty on all counts. When the sentence came down, I watched her shoulders sag under the weight of it. 6 years in state prison. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She just sat down like the floor had shifted under her feet. But the fallout didn't stop there. Within a week, the Sunridge Valley HOA board was formally dissolved. The state revoked their charter, citing gross misconduct and fraudulent operation. The community's funds, what little remained, were frozen pending investigation. Several vendors tied to Karen's relatives were subpoenaed for tax fraud. And me, I finally got peace. I rebuilt the part of my fence that had been knocked down during the earlier notice delivery, cleaned up the paint someone had tossed over my sign months back, upgraded the security cameras again, planted 2 new oaks along the property line. Dana said they'd outlive us both. I even hung a new banner across the gate. Free land, no dues, no tyrants. For the first time since I'd moved in, I could breathe without looking over my shoulder. People I barely knew dropped off beers, pies, thank you notes. One guy even left a bottle of aged bourbon in my mailbox with a sticky note that read, "For services rendered, cheers." A year passed. Not quickly, not slowly, just enough to remind you that the dust always settles, even if it kicks up like hell first. The land around my house was greener than it had been in decades, maybe because I finally had the time to care for it. Maybe because I wasn't spending every waking minute documenting legal attacks or checking for lunatics with clipboards near my fence line. Karen was gone, doing her time in a facility out near Lubbock. I didn't bother keeping tabs. She'd had her say, and the law had spoken. Far as I was concerned, that chapter was closed, but the story didn't end with her. After the case, I started getting emails, then phone calls, then letters. People from across the state, sometimes across the country, reaching out because they'd seen the articles, the clips, the court coverage. Some wanted advice. Others just wanted to say thanks. One guy from Arizona told me his HOA tried something similar, and he'd used my case as a precedent to shut them down before they got too bold. The name stuck. The Cole precedent. I didn't plan it, didn't chase it, but I leaned into it. With Dana's help and some volunteers I met along the way, we started a group, Homefront Defense Network. Free resources, legal templates, a hotline. No politics, no posturing. Just real help for real homeowners who didn't want to get bulldozed by petty tyrants in blazers. We hosted our first seminar in Austin at a community hall. 50 people showed up. The next month, there were 120. I stood in front of a projector screen with a mic clipped to my collar and told them what I'd learned the hard way. Know your deed. Know your boundaries. Cameras save cases. Silence isn't peace. It's surrender. People listened, and not just listened, stood up. I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy it. Not the attention, but the feeling that maybe, just maybe, I'd managed to turn something bitter into something solid. One night, after a seminar in Fort Worth, a woman in her 60s came up to me. She hugged me like I was her son. "They tried to take my house," she said, "but they didn't. Because of you." That night, I sat on the porch with Dana and watched the Texas sky stretch forever over our land. The flag on my pole swayed gently in the wind. No one could take it from me now. Not with a fake map. Not with a knock on the door. Not with a lie dressed as a rule book. This was our home, and we'd earned every inch of it.